Highlands Brigade is broke. Plug the gap, if you please. Now's the time for the heavy cavalry, I think.
By all means, sir. Gordon, get your bastards up onto the crest. I'll bring up the rest of the brigade.
Don't hurry yourself, Pick. My lads will hold them. Aye, till you come.
Get forward, damn your eyes.
The 92nd will advance. Gleason, McLaren! Has Wellington nothing to offer me but these Amazons?
Those so-called Amazons, referred to as such by Napoleon, were indeed one of the most notorious regiments in the British and Scottish rosters, and are in many ways the embodiment of Highland soldiers with their feathered bonnets, kilts, and Caledonian battle fury. It is undeniable that the Highland regiments, comprising brawny and hardy lads from the picturesque but brutal Highlands and Islands of Scotland, were highly exoticized in order to both evoke a unique and ferocious warrior spirit, and of course, to present to the enemy terrifying men of war. The regiment, formerly known as the Gordon Highlanders, starts its story in 1881, but their roots as Gordons go well back to the 92nd Regiment of Foot, raised in Aberdeenshire during the scare of the French Revolution. Throughout its illustrious and heroic history, the Gordon Highlanders cultivated an image of courageous soldiers, ferocious in battle, but well-mannered and behaved well whenever they were around the world. This was summarised in the regimental motto, Bidand, Middle Scots for steadfast, or possibly also a contraction of bide and fecht, stay and fight, something the Gordons did on more than one occasion. Due to the extraordinary and well-documented history of the Gordon Highlanders, they will be covered in two parts, with their first part covering the Gordons prior to their 1881 amalgamation with the 75th Stirlingshire Regiment of Foot. Our story begins amidst the continental turmoil sparked by the French Revolution, a point in time which saw many new regiments in the British Army raised as the threat of republicanism called our shires to arms. Originally raised the 100th Gordon Highlanders Regiment of Foot by General George Gordon, the 5th Duke of Gordon, the men were principally raised from the Aberdeenshire area. Initially, recruiting was not going terribly well. For him to so, his beautiful and much younger wife took it upon herself to ride, in uniform, to country fairs around the region with a guinea between her lips, offering a kiss to any lad who joined her husband's regiment. It suffices to say that not a short time afterwards, the regiment was brought to well over strength, more than 1,000 men under its colours, and it shipped out for Gibraltar. From here onwards, it performed a number of garrison duties, deploying to recently invaded Corsica and Alba, before returning to Gibraltar and then England and Ireland, where it helped suppress the Irish Rebellion of 1798, around which point it was reordered the 92nd Regiment of Foot. The following year, the regiment departed as part of General Sir Abercrombie's expedition to the Netherlands, along with the Russians, to overthrow the French puppet state that was the Batavian Republic, seeing action at the Battle of Alkmaar in October, but returned home later that month. The regiment next saw action in Egypt, leading the British column of advance at the Battle of Mendora in 1801, where their ranks were savagely swept by French musket and artillery fire. But it was a victory for the British Army nonetheless. So depleted was the 92nd from battle casualties and disease that it was ordered to return to Aboukir, rather than take part in the Battle of Alexandria shortly afterwards. However, during the battle, General Abercrombie, who would later be killed in mounted combat, happened to ride past the remnants of the 92nd, who implored him to join the battle, to which he assented. All regiments which had served in Egypt thereafter gained a sphinx on their regimental colours, and indeed would later appear on the collar insignia of the Gordons. The regiment was rather busy during the Napoleonic Wars, marking its first engagement in 1807 at the Battle of Kurga, Denmark, where the regiment alongside others under the up-and-coming Arthur Wellesley saw off a large force of freshly mobilised Danish militia, before pushing forward to attack Copenhagen. In 1808 the regiment departed for Portugal, to fight in the long and bloody Peninsular War, which would see Britain and Portugal, along with ad hoc Spanish assistance, wrestle control of the Iberian Peninsula from the French forces. It saw some action at the Battle of Corunna, before having a brief break from Iberia, and was sent to the Netherlands again for the disastrous Walcheren expedition, where more British soldiers died of disease than of combat. It then returned to Portugal in 1810 under the now Lord Arthur Wellesley, Viscount of Wellington. Here they saw action at Fuentes de Onoro, the second siege of Badajoz, Arroyos dos Molinos, Almaraz, and the Great Battle of Vitoria in 1813, where the regiment distinguished itself by seizing and then holding the Puebla Heights against furious French resistance and counterattacks. The regiment then continued in the campaign, with the British Army pushing through the Pyrenees, during which time its conduct earned the remark from Sir William Napier, the stern valour of the 92nd would have graced Thermopylae. At the Battle of Maya Pass, the French launched a surprise attack and pushed the light units of the British Army back some distance, before the Gordons amongst others took the strain of the advance and halted the French, allowing other more mauled units to retreat steadily. After 10 hours of fighting, reinforcements arrived and counterattacked. On account of lack of ammunition and having bore the brunt of the French assault, the regiment was ordered not to attack, but it disregarded the order and instead actually led the charge to drive the French from the pass. The regiment consequently saw action at the Battle of Nivelles, Nives, Orthez, and finally Toulouse in 1814, which marked the end of the Peninsular Campaign. This brings us to the first regimental story of the Gordon Highlanders, the Battle of Waterloo. With Napoleon having escaped exile and raised an army in France, the regiment was sent to the Netherlands again to fight in the 100 Days campaign in 1815 under the Duke of Wellington. The British were taken by surprise by Napoleon's swift manoeuvring into Belgium, and many officers joined their regiment straight from the Duchess of Richmond's ball in Brussels, which the French had rather rudely interrupted, and where minutes previously sergeants of the Gordon Highlanders had been dancing reels as a spectacle for their guests. Formed within the brigade of the Welsh General Picton, the Gordons stoutly held the crossroads at the Battle of Quatre Bras, before conducting a heroic but costly bayonet charge into the breaking French army, driving it back until nightfall and the end of the battle. Their commander, however, Colonel John Cameron, was mortally wounded by the French musket, and fell from his horse. He died content, informed of his regiment's success, passing with his final words, "I die happy, and I trust my country will believe that I have served her faithfully." His death inspired a poem from Sir Walter Scott. Through battle, rout and reel, through a storm of shot and hedge of steel, led the grandson of Lochiel, the valiant Fassifern. Through steel and shot he leads no more, low laid mid friends and foemen's gore, but long his native lake's wild shore, and Sunat rough and wild Argur, and Morven's long shall tell, and proud Ben Nevis hear with awe, how at the bloody Quatre Bras, brave Cameron heard the wild hurrah, and conquest as he fell.
Few shots from the French and they'll be themselves again.
I like the cut of your men, Gordon.
Ah, damn forward fellas with a bayonet, Wellington.
Meat and eggs from the cradle up on a lemon a month.
Stand still and be beneath the gallows tree. The crew was a common with a vigil and to say.
All from my own acres, bred of myself. Some there could call me something more than colonel, eh?
Indeed.
That night, the pipe major played a sorrowful tune for their fallen Gordons and their colonel, whilst the soldiers cooked their suppers in the breastplates of the French cuirassiers they had slain. As dawn rose over the field of Waterloo on the 18th of June under their new commander, Colonel Donald MacDonald, the Gordon Highlanders formed a secondary line behind the Dutch-German troops on the ridge, which were subject to withering French cannonade fire. Eventually, the troops in front of them broke and Colonel MacDonald ordered them forward. Having suffered terrible losses at Quatre Bras, the regiment was only at half strength. Nonetheless, forming a bristling wall of bayonets and kilts, 2 ranks deep, the regiment surged forward to defend the crest of the hill, and charged headlong at the much more numerous French columns, as wide as the Gordon line, and many, many more ranks deep. Upon seeing the screaming Highlanders bearing down upon them, the pipes blaring loudly, the French are said to have stood motionless in abject terror, before becoming overcome with a panic and throwing down their weapons to aid their flight. It was at this point where the fates of the Gordon Highlanders and another illustrious Scottish regiment, the Royal Scots Greys, crossed path, as the heavy cavalry brigades thundered down the hill and crashed into the fleeing mass of Frenchmen. A cry of "Scotland forever!" rose up and was met with a roar of approval from the Scots on both foot and horse alike, as they set about inflicting tremendous slaughter. The Gordons clutched onto the stirrups of the Scots Greys and rode with them through the retreating French soldiers, dealing death far and wide. The Gordons saw little more action that day, but their first engagement had been enough to immortalise them in the memory of Waterloo and Scottish warrior heroism, gaining a lion's share of the glory that day. The regiment was lavished with praise following the great Anglo-Prussian victory at Waterloo, including by the Duke of Wellington himself, who stopped them during the march to Paris in person. The regiment returned to Scotland and were met in Edinburgh by throngs of cheering townsfolk who welcomed them profusely. Among the cheering crowds was a soldier of the 42nd Regiment, otherwise known as the Black Watch, between whom the Gordons had a rivalry with. He shouted to them, "This is nothing to what it was when we came home. We could hardly make our way through the crowd." A Gordon Highlander quickly retorted, "You should have sent for us to clear the way for you, as we often done before." The regiment in 1819 embarked for duties in Jamaica, where it remained until 1827, sustaining many casualties from the yellow fever. However, it was lauded nonetheless for its conduct there by the population of Kingston. Thereafter, it performed uneventful garrison duties in Ireland, Gibraltar, several different posts in the West Indies, and the Ionian Islands. Wherever they were stationed, at home or abroad, they were always won the acclaim and esteem of the local populace for their good behaviour and immaculate dress, many cities such as Glasgow even expressing formal regret at their departures. Whilst garrisoned in Gibraltar in 1853, the regiment was called upon for their service in the Crimea, where having arrived late saw little to no action save for the siege of Sebastopol. It left for India in 1858 to suppress the Indian Mutiny, where it took part in many skirmishes, but no major battles, putting down the armed remnants of the mutiny and pursuing the rebels. It remained in India for a further 3 years, during which time it was officially termed the 92nd Gordon Highlanders, in 1861, before returning to England. It had a brief spell of aiding the civil power in Ireland before returning to India in 1868, where little of note occurred to it until 1878. At this point, it was ordered into Afghanistan for the Second Anglo-Afghan War, where it distinguished itself at the Battle of Chirasiab, taking 3 hill positions in quick succession, with Major White earning himself a Victoria Cross, and shortly afterwards, a second Victoria Cross came to the regiment through the actions of Lieutenant Dick Cunningham at Sherpur cantonments, who, having seen his senior officer and colour sergeant falling to resolute Afghan hilltop positions, exposed himself valiantly and rallied the Gordon Highlanders behind him to charge the heights, which they did and took them. In September 1880, the Gordon Highlanders marched from Kabul to relieve Kandahar, where several hundred British soldiers were besieged within. In a brisk and dashing action, the 92nd cleared the surrounding areas of the village at bayonet point, with brutal hand-to-hand combat ensuing, during which a certain Lieutenant Menzies, hearing voices on the other side of a locked door, drew his sidearm and blew the lock off. But a second shot rang out, and Menzies collapsed to the floor. Drummer Roddick unsheathed his claymore and stood astride over his wounded commander, fighting the tribesmen off until another soldier arrived to drag Menzies away to safety. Rather than return to the United Kingdom in 1881, the regiment was sent to Natal for the First Boer War, where it saw action at the disastrous Battle of Manjuba Hill, having taken the hill alongside what would become the Northamptonshire Regiment, and some naval gunners then found themselves exposed to a large Boer force, which assaulted the hill and under blistering fire reduced the defenders almost to a man. The remainder fixed bayonets and endured the shootout against superior numbers, rummaging through the pouches of their fallen comrades for ammunition. Eventually they were overcome, and some even resorting to hurling stones at the Boers. Of those who managed to fall back or were taken prisoner, not one round of ammunition was found on them. While still in Africa, as part of the Childers reforms, the 92nd Highlanders were amalgamated with the 75th Stirlingshire Regiment of Foot to form simply the Gordon Highlanders, becoming the Regiment of Aberdeenshire, Banffshire, Kincardineshire and Shetland. Our story will continue in part 2 of the Gordon Highlanders, where the history of the amalgamated regiment will be told as it fights in India, South Africa, both world wars and its post-war tours of duty. I hope you enjoyed this first instalment of the Gordon Highlanders. If this is your first time on the channel, give the video a like and subscribe for more content which will be coming out soon.